My youth pastor handed me adoption papers to sign. The family waiting outside wasn't mine. Pastor Glenn Hartley closed his office door and set a manila folder on the desk between us, his expression serious in the way adults look when they're about to deliver bad news. I'd been called out of youth group on a Wednesday evening, pulled aside during worship practice, and told Pastor Glenn needed to speak with me privately. I assumed maybe I was in trouble for something, or he wanted to talk about my mom's drinking again, but when he opened the folder and slid papers across the desk, I saw the words, "Petition for Adoption" at the top, and my brain stopped working. "Ethan, I know this is going to be difficult to process, but we need to move quickly. The Whitfield family is waiting in the parking lot, and they're excited to meet you officially. They've been approved through the state, and all the paperwork is ready. I just need your signature on these consent forms." His voice was calm and practiced, the same tone he used when counseling teenagers through crisis situations. But this wasn't counseling. This was insane. I stared at the papers covered in legal language and official-looking seals, my name typed on multiple lines throughout the document. I don't understand. Adoption? My mom is alive. I'm not up for adoption. What are you talking about? Pastor Glenn leaned back in his leather chair and folded his hands, his expression sympathetic but firm. "Ethan, your mother signed over her parental rights 3 weeks ago. She came to me because she knows she can't provide the stability you need, and she wanted to make sure you went to a good Christian family who could give you opportunities she can't afford. The Whitfields are wonderful people, active members of our sister church in Greenville. They have a beautiful home, resources for your education, and they're committed to raising you in a godly environment." My hands started shaking because none of this made sense. Mom and I had problems, sure. She drank too much and struggled to keep jobs, and we'd moved 4 times in the past 2 years. But she'd never mentioned giving me up for adoption. Never said anything about not wanting me anymore. We'd had breakfast together that morning. She'd asked about my history test. She'd reminded me about youth group tonight. She acted completely normal. "Where is my mom? I need to talk to her right now." Pastor Glenn shook his head slowly. "Ethan, your mother thought it would be easier this way. She didn't want a long goodbye to make things harder for both of you. She's already signed everything, and she's prepared for you to transition to your new family tonight. The Whitfields have set up a bedroom for you, and they're ready to help you start fresh." He pushed the papers closer to me and pointed at a signature line near the bottom of the first page. "I need you to sign here acknowledging that you understand the adoption and consent to the placement. Since you're 16, the state requires your signature for the process to be finalized." I looked at the signature line and then at Pastor Glenn's face, searching for some indication this was a joke or a misunderstanding, but he looked completely serious, even slightly impatient that I wasn't immediately complying. Outside the office window, I could see the parking lot where youth group kids were heading to their cars after practice ended. A silver minivan I didn't recognize was parked near the entrance with 2 people visible in the front seats. "I'm not signing anything until I talk to my mom. This doesn't make any sense. She wouldn't just give me away without telling me." Pastor Glenn's expression shifted slightly, a flash of annoyance crossing his face before the sympathetic mask returned. "Ethan, I understand this is shocking, but your mother was very clear about her decision. She came to me 6 weeks ago in crisis, crying about how she couldn't keep failing you, how she wanted better for your life. She asked me to help facilitate a private adoption through our church network because she trusts me and she trusts our community. This is what she wants. This is what's best for you." He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out another document, this one with my mom's signature at the bottom dated 3 weeks ago. The signature looked right, her messy scrawl with the way she always looped the Y in her last name. But the document was titled Voluntary Relinquishment of Parental Rights, and it said she was permanently terminating her legal relationship with me due to inability to provide adequate care. My stomach felt sick reading those words supposedly coming from my mom. "Can I see my phone? I want to text her." Pastor Glenn's jaw tightened. "Ethan, your mother specifically asked that there be no contact during the transition period. She knows if she hears from you, it will make this harder for her. She's doing what she thinks is right, even though it breaks her heart. The most loving thing you can do is respect her decision and sign these papers so we can move forward." His voice was getting firmer now, less sympathetic and more authoritative. "The Whitfields have taken time off work to be here tonight. They've spent months preparing for your arrival. They're good people who are offering you a real chance at a stable life. You're 16 years old, Ethan. In 2 years, you'll age out of the system anyway. This is your opportunity to have a real family, to go to college, to build a future. Don't throw that away because you're scared of change." Everything he said sounded reasonable on the surface, but underneath it felt coercive and wrong. Adoption required months of process, home studies, background checks, court hearings. You couldn't just sign papers in a church office on a Wednesday night and hand a kid over to strangers. "I want to call Child Protective Services or a lawyer. I don't think this is legal." Pastor Glenn stood up from his chair and walked around the desk, positioning himself between me and the door. His voice stayed calm, but his body language had changed, become more imposing. "Ethan, everything here is completely legal and above board. The Whitfields went through the proper channels with the state. Your mother signed the relinquishment forms with a notary present. I'm a licensed family counselor in addition to being a pastor, and I facilitated the process according to all regulations. What you're doing right now is stalling because you're scared, and I understand that. But you don't get to hold up this process because you're having an emotional reaction. You're a minor and your mother has made the decision. Now you can either sign these papers cooperatively, or the Whitfields can petition the court to compel your placement, which will take longer and be more traumatic for everyone involved. The threat in his voice was clear despite the gentle words. Sign now, or this happens anyway, just worse. I looked at the papers again and noticed something I'd missed before. In the section listing the adopting parents' information, there was a box for placement fee, with the amount $45,000 listed. Why is there money involved? Are they paying to adopt me? Pastor Glenn moved back behind his desk, and his expression became businesslike. Private adoptions often involve compensation to cover medical expenses, legal fees, and support for the birth mother during the transition. It's completely standard and legal. The Whitfields are covering your mother's rent for 6 months and providing funds to help her get back on her feet while she processes this difficult decision. It's actually a generous arrangement that benefits everyone. $45,000. That wasn't covering my mom's rent. That was buying a child. I thought about Mom's desperate phone calls over the past months, the eviction notices, her crying about bills she couldn't pay, her increasing drinking as the stress piled up. If someone had offered her $45,000 to sign adoption papers, would she have done it? The mom I knew would never sell her kid, but the mom who'd been spiraling for the past year, who'd lost 3 jobs and was about to be evicted again, who drank herself unconscious most nights. I didn't know what that version of my mother was capable of anymore. I need to think about this. I need more time. Pastor Glenn checked his watch, and his patience was clearly wearing thin. The Whitfields have been waiting for 30 minutes. This office is booked for another counseling session in 15 minutes. Ethan, I'm trying to help you, but you need to make a decision. Sign the papers and go with your new family tonight, or I'll have to call the placement coordinator and explain that you're being uncooperative, which could result in you going into emergency foster care while this gets sorted out. Is that what you want? To end up in the system instead of with a family who actually wants you? The choice he was presenting was false. I knew that instinctively. But I was 16 years old, sitting in a church office with an adult authority figure telling me my mother had given me away and I needed to sign papers or face worse consequences. My hands were shaking when I picked up the pen Pastor Glenn had placed on the desk. Then I set it down again. I want to meet them first, the Whitfields. If they're going to be my family, I should at least talk to them before I sign anything. Pastor Glenn's expression suggested this was an annoying but manageable request. Fine. But keep in mind, they've been told you're excited about this placement. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. He opened his office door and gestured for me to follow him. We walked through the church's education wing toward the main entrance. Through the glass doors, I could see the silver minivan parked under a streetlight. Pastor Glenn pushed open the doors, and the November air was cold enough to make me shiver in my thin youth group t-shirt. The minivan's doors opened and 2 people got out. The woman was in her early 40s wearing a cardigan and khakis, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. The man was older, maybe 50, with graying hair and a polo shirt. They both smiled when they saw us approaching, warm, friendly smiles that didn't match the situation. The woman rushed forward with her arms out. Ethan, we're so excited to finally meet you. I'm Dorothy Whitfield, and this is my husband, Kenneth. We've been praying for you for months. She tried to hug me, but I stepped back, my arms crossed over my chest. Pastor Glenn says my mom signed papers giving me up for adoption. I want to know why you're paying $45,000 for me. Dorothy's smile faltered, and she glanced at Pastor Glenn nervously. Kenneth stepped forward, and his voice was hearty and false. Son, that money isn't payment for you. It's support for your mother to help her through a difficult time. Pastor Glenn explained that she's struggling and needs financial help. We're blessed to be in a position where we can provide for both of you. His explanation sounded rehearsed, and I wondered how many times they'd had this conversation, how many kids they'd done this with before. What happens if I say I don't want to be adopted? What if I want to stay with my mom? Dorothy's expression shifted to something harder beneath the friendly exterior. Ethan, your mother has already relinquished her rights. You can't stay with her even if you wanted to. The choice is between coming with us to a good home or going into the foster system. We're offering you stability, a college fund, a real future. Why would you turn that down? Because this entire situation felt wrong in ways I couldn't fully articulate. Because adoption didn't happen in church parking lots on Wednesday nights. Because my mom wouldn't have done this without telling me. Because these people looked at me with the satisfaction of a transaction completed rather than the love of new parents meeting their child. I pulled out my phone from my pocket, and Kenneth's expression changed immediately. What are you doing? His voice lost the friendly tone and became sharp. I'm calling my mom. I need to hear this from her. Pastor Glenn reached for my phone, but I stepped back quickly. Ethan, I told you she requested no contact during the transition. Give me the phone. He wasn't asking anymore. He was commanding. Kenneth moved around to my left side, and Dorothy stayed to my right, boxing me in near the church entrance. The parking lot was nearly empty now. Youth group over. Most of the kids gone. A few stragglers were in their cars, but no one was paying attention to us. Pastor Glenn held out his hand. Give me the phone now. This is not up for negotiation. I tried to dial Mom's number, but Kenneth grabbed my wrist hard enough to hurt, twisting my arm until the phone fell. Dorothy picked it up quickly and handed it to Pastor Glenn, who pocketed it without a word. "You're making this much more difficult than it needs to be. Get in the van." Kenneth's grip on my wrist was painful, and he started pulling me toward the minivan. I tried to jerk away, but he was stronger, and Dorothy moved behind me, both of them physically steering me toward the vehicle. This wasn't adoption. This was kidnapping. I started yelling, "Help! Someone help me! They're trying to take me!" My voice echoed across the parking lot, and a couple getting into their car near the church gym looked over. Pastor Glenn called out to them, his voice friendly and reassuring. "Just a difficult transition for one of our foster teens. Everything's fine." The couple hesitated, but then got in their car, probably not wanting to get involved in what looked like a family situation. Kenneth opened the minivan's sliding door and tried to push me inside. I grabbed the door frame and held on, making myself dead weight. Dorothy pushed from behind while Kenneth pulled my arms, trying to force me into the van. "Stop fighting us. This is happening whether you cooperate or not." I kicked backward and felt my heel connect with Dorothy's shin. She cried out and loosened her grip for a second. I twisted out of Kenneth's hold and ran. Not toward the parking lot exit, but toward the church building, through the main entrance and into the hallway. I could hear them running behind me, their footsteps echoing on the tile floor. I ran past the sanctuary and through the education wing, looking for somewhere to hide or another exit or someone who could help. The church was mostly empty at 8:30 on a Wednesday evening, just a custodian vacuuming somewhere distant. I tried the youth room door, but it was locked. Tried the choir room, and same thing. Behind me, Pastor Glenn's voice called out, "Ethan, stop running. You're only making this worse. There's nowhere to go." I turned a corner and found the church office, the main administrative suite. The door was unlocked, and I ran inside, slamming it behind me and clicking the lock. It was a flimsy privacy lock that wouldn't hold long, but it bought me seconds. I grabbed the desk phone and dialed 911. The operator answered immediately. 911, what's your emergency?" I was breathing hard, my words coming out fast. "I'm being kidnapped. I'm at Cornerstone Community Church on Riverside Drive. My youth pastor is trying to force me to sign adoption papers and give me to people I don't know. They chased me through the church, and they're trying to take me against my will." The operator's voice was professional but urgent. "What's your name and age?" "Ethan Carlisle, I'm 16. Please send someone now. They're going to break down the door." There was pounding on the office door, and Pastor Glenn's voice, no longer gentle. "Ethan, open this door right now. You're being irrational, and you need to calm down." The operator stayed on the line. "Ethan, officers are on the way. Stay where you are and stay on the phone with me. Don't open the door for anyone until police arrive." I could hear multiple people in the hallway now, Kenneth and Dorothy talking to Pastor Glenn in urgent tones. "We need to get him out of here before the police come. If this turns into a thing, the whole operation is at risk." Dorothy's voice was panicked. "You said this would be smooth. You said the kid would cooperate." Kenneth's voice cut through. "We paid $45,000. We're not leaving without him. Break the damn door down." There was silence, and then the sound of a key in the lock. Pastor Glenn had keys to every room in the church. The lock clicked, and the door opened. Pastor Glenn stood in the doorway with Kenneth and Dorothy behind him. His expression was cold and calculating, nothing like the compassionate youth pastor I'd known for 3 years. "Ethan, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Hang up the phone." I kept the phone pressed to my ear, and the 911 operator's voice was saying something about officers being 2 minutes away. Pastor Glenn crossed the room faster than I expected and grabbed the phone from my hand, ripping it away and slamming it down to end the call. Kenneth grabbed my arm and started dragging me toward the door while I fought to break free. We were halfway down the hallway when sirens became audible outside. Pastor Glenn froze. "Let him go. We need to control the narrative before the police get here." Kenneth released me and stepped back. Pastor Glenn straightened his shirt, and his voice returned to that calm, pastoral tone. "Ethan, I'm going to tell the police you had a panic attack and ran away during a routine counseling session. The Whitfields will corroborate that they're friends of the church who were here for a meeting. No one has to know about the adoption papers. You calm down, play along, and this ends quietly. Otherwise, I'll tell them you've been having violent outbursts and need psychiatric evaluation. Which story do you think they'll believe? A respected pastor or a troubled teenager with a drunk mother?" 2 police. Officers entered through the church's main entrance, their radios crackling. One was a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes that took in the scene immediately. The other was an older man who looked tired. The female officer addressed all of us. "We got a 911 call reporting a kidnapping in progress. Someone want to explain what's happening?" I spoke before Pastor Glenn could. "My name is Ethan Carlisle. Pastor Glenn Hartley tried to force me to sign adoption papers for these 2 people, Kenneth and Dorothy Whitfield, who I've never met before. They physically restrained me and chased me through the church when I refused. I want to press charges for attempted kidnapping." Pastor Glenn's expression was perfectly controlled, concerned, but not defensive. "Officer, I'm Glenn Hartley, senior pastor here at Cornerstone. Ethan is one of our youth group members going through a difficult time at home. His mother has been struggling with substance abuse and reached out to our church for help. The Whitfields are family friends who offered to provide temporary housing while we work out a more permanent solution. Ethan misunderstood the situation and had a panic attack. There's been no kidnapping. The male officer turned to Kenneth and Dorothy. Can you verify what the pastor is saying? Kenneth nodded quickly. We're friends of the church, and we offered to help. The boy got confused and scared. We would never try to take a child against his will. His voice was smooth and reasonable, nothing like the threatening tone he'd used minutes ago when demanding they break down the door. The female officer looked at me. Son, do you have any evidence of what you're claiming? Any paperwork or proof that these people were trying to adopt you? I realized my mistake immediately. The adoption papers were still in Pastor Glenn's office. My phone with my mom's number was in his pocket. I had no physical evidence at all, just my word against 3 adults who looked respectable and credible. The papers are in his office. He has them in a manila folder on his desk. And he took my phone when I tried to call my mother. The female officer nodded to her partner. Check the office. They walked down the hallway with Pastor Glenn leading them, his expression cooperative and helpful. I followed with the male officer staying close. In Pastor Glenn's office, his desk was clear. The manila folder with the adoption papers was gone. The pen I'd almost signed with was gone. There was no evidence anything had happened here except a normal counseling session. Pastor Glenn opened his drawer and pulled out a notebook, flipping to a page with notes dated today. This is from our session tonight. Ethan came to me expressing anxiety about his home situation and his mother's drinking. We discussed coping strategies, and I offered to connect him with families in our congregation who might provide temporary support. He became agitated when I suggested involving social services to evaluate his home environment, which is when he ran. The notes looked authentic, written in Pastor Glenn's handwriting with clinical observations about my emotional state. The female officer read them carefully. Do you have this boy's phone? Pastor Glenn pulled my phone from his pocket and handed it to her. He dropped it in the hallway when he was running. I picked it up to return it to him once he calmed down. She handed me the phone and I unlocked it immediately, pulling up my call log. Look, I called 911 at 8:31. That's on record. Why would I call 911 during a normal counseling session? The officer noted the call time, but her expression suggested this proved nothing. People called 911 during mental health crises all the time. Is there someone we can call to verify your story? Your mother? I dialed Mom's number and it rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Her voice on the recording was slurred and I knew she was drunk. Hey, it's Diane. Leave a message. I tried again. Same result. The officers exchanged a look that said they'd seen this pattern before. Troubled teen with an alcoholic parent having a breakdown at church. Pastor Glenn's version of events made sense to them in a way my kidnapping story didn't. The female officer's voice was kind but firm. Ethan, I think you should go home. We can give you a ride if you need one. But there's no evidence of any crime here. If you're having problems at home, there are proper channels to go through. Social services can help. No, I'm not going anywhere until you search them. Check their pockets, check the van. The adoption papers exist. He's lying. Pastor Glenn sighed heavily. Officer, I'm happy to cooperate fully. You're welcome to search anything you want. I have nothing to hide. His confidence made my stomach sink because he'd clearly gotten rid of the evidence while I was hiding in the office. The officers did a cursory search of the van, finding nothing. Kenneth and Dorothy stood by, looking patient and slightly concerned. Perfect expressions of innocent people dealing with a disturbed teenager. The male officer closed his notebook. Son, I understand you're going through a tough time, but making false accusations against people trying to help you isn't the answer. Go home, get some rest, talk to your mother when she's available. If you're genuinely in danger at home, call the child abuse hotline and make a report through proper channels. They were leaving. They were going to walk away and leave me here with Pastor Glenn and the Whitfields, who would now be even more motivated to silence me before I could cause more problems. Wait, check the church's security cameras. This building has cameras in the hallways. They'll show Kenneth and Dorothy chasing me, show them forcing me toward the van. The female officer looked at Pastor Glenn. Is that true? Do you have security footage? Pastor Glenn nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. We do have cameras. Unfortunately, they're on a 7-day loop and tonight's footage hasn't been backed up to the server yet. The system is old and the recordings are stored locally, but I can certainly show you what we have. He led everyone to a small security room near the church office. An old monitor showed 6 camera feeds in black and white, different angles of the church interior and parking lot. Pastor Glenn pressed buttons on the recording system and pulled up the parking lot feed from 8:15 p.m. The timestamp showed me walking out with Pastor Glenn, then it showed me talking to Kenneth and Dorothy. From the camera angle, it looked like a normal conversation. You couldn't see Kenneth grabbing my wrist. You couldn't hear me yelling. You couldn't see them trying to force me into the van because the angle was wrong. Pastor Glenn fast-forwarded through the footage, showing me running back into the church. The hallway cameras showed me running alone, no one chasing me initially. Then Pastor Glenn, Kenneth, and Dorothy walking calmly down the hall looking for me. From the camera footage, it looked exactly how Pastor Glenn described it. A panicked teenager running from people trying to help. The female officer turned to me. Son, I don't see anything here that supports your version of events. Is it possible you misunderstood what was happening? Is it possible the stress at home made you interpret a helpful offer as something threatening? My hands were shaking with frustration and fear. They edited the footage. Or they knew where the camera blind spots were. This was planned. Please, you have to believe me. But I could see in their faces they didn't believe me. They saw what everyone always saw when a troubled kid from a broken home accused respected community members of wrongdoing. A teenager acting out, making dramatic accusations, desperate for attention or control in a chaotic life. The officers left after making me promise to call the social services hotline if I needed help. When their car pulled out of the parking lot, the church felt very quiet. Pastor Glenn turned to face me and all pretense of pastoral concern was gone. You just made this exponentially more complicated. We were trying to do this cleanly, trying to give you a better situation than what you have now. Your mother is a drunk who can barely take care of herself. The Whitfields could have provided stability, education, opportunity, but you had to be dramatic and involve the police. Kenneth stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. We paid good money. We're not walking away from this. You're going to sign those papers one way or another. I backed toward the church entrance. You're insane if you think I'm going anywhere with you after this. I'm going home, and I'm telling my mom everything. Dorothy pulled out her phone. Your mother is in no condition to help you. Glenn, show him. Pastor Glenn pulled out his own phone and opened a video. The footage showed my mom in our apartment, clearly intoxicated, stumbling into furniture. The date stamp was from earlier this evening. Someone had been in our home filming her without her knowledge. We have hours of footage like this. Your mother drinking, passing out, leaving you alone for days while she works or goes on benders. If this goes to social services, they'll remove you from the home immediately. You'll end up in emergency foster placement, probably a group home. Or you can come with the Whitfields willingly. Your mother gets financial support to get sober and everyone benefits. Pastor Glenn's voice was calm and practical, laying out the logic of my situation. You're 16 years old with no resources, no legal standing, and a mother who can barely function. We control the narrative here. We have documentation, we have witnesses, we have video evidence of an unfit home. The only question is whether you make this easy or hard. But the outcome is the same either way. My mind raced through options. I couldn't go home because they'd obviously been watching our apartment and could get to Mom. I couldn't go to the police because I'd already tried and they didn't believe me. I couldn't contact anyone from church because Pastor Glenn controlled that entire community. I was trapped. Why are you doing this? What do you get out of it? Pastor Glenn smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen on a pastor's face. The Whitfields pay $45,000 per placement. I facilitate 4 to 6 placements per year through our church network, connecting wealthy couples who want children with struggling parents who need money. Everyone signs proper paperwork. Everything looks legal and voluntary. The birth parents get financial relief. The adopting parents get the child they want, and I get a coordination fee for my services. It's a sustainable system that's been operating successfully for 5 years. 5 years. 4 to 6 placements per year. That meant Pastor Glenn had sold somewhere between 20 and 30 children to wealthy couples, all disguised as compassionate Christian adoption services. How do you sleep at night knowing you're trafficking children? Kenneth stepped forward. We're not trafficking anything. We're providing good homes to kids from bad situations. You should be grateful. But I saw the truth in their faces. This wasn't about helping kids. This was about money and desire, about wealthy couples who didn't want to go through legitimate adoption channels paying for instant families, and a predator pastor monetizing the desperation of struggling parents. The church entrance doors opened and my mom stumbled in, her face flushed and her eyes unfocused but filled with rage I'd never seen before. Where is my son? Someone from church called and said Ethan was in trouble. Where is he? She saw me standing near Pastor Glenn and rushed forward, nearly tripping over her own feet. What's going on? Why did I get a call saying my kid was being taken? Pastor Glenn's expression smoothed into pastoral concern. Diane, thank you for coming. Ethan and I were just discussing some options for his living situation while you work on your recovery. The Whitfields have generously offered to provide temporary housing. No one is taking him anywhere without your knowledge. Mom looked at the Whitfields and confusion crossed her face. Who are you? I don't know you. Dorothy's voice was soothing and patronizing. We met 3 weeks ago when you came to Pastor Glenn about needing help. You signed papers agreeing to let us take care of Ethan while you get back on your feet. Remember? Mom's face went blank and then angry. I never signed anything. I never talked to any of you about taking my kid. What papers? She was drunk, but she was coherent enough to know something was wrong. Pastor Glenn pulled out a document from his briefcase, and I realized he'd been carrying the adoption papers with him the whole time, just moved them during the police search. He showed Mom the signature at the bottom. You came to my office on October 18th. You were emotional and said you couldn't take care of Ethan properly anymore. You signed these relinquishment papers after we discussed your options. I have detailed counseling notes from that session. Mom grabbed the papers and stared at the signature, her signature, but she shook her head. I was never here on October 18th. I was working a double shift at the warehouse. I have time cards. This is fake. You forged my signature. Pastor Glenn's voice stayed calm. Diane, you came in after your shift. You'd been drinking. I have security footage of your visit. You don't remember because you were intoxicated. Mom looked at me, and despite her current state, despite being drunk right now, I saw clarity in her eyes. Did you agree to this? Do you want to go with these people? I shook my head. No. They tried to force me. Pastor Glenn had me sign papers, and when I refused, they chased me through the church. I called 911. This is kidnapping dressed up as adoption. Mom turned to Pastor Glenn, and her voice was low and dangerous. You tried to take my son. You forged my signature and tried to steal my child. I'm calling the police right now. She pulled out her phone, but Kenneth moved fast, grabbing it from her hand. You're not calling anyone. You're drunk, and you have no credibility. Who do you think they'll believe? A drunk who can barely stand, or a pastor with documentation and witnesses? Mom swung at him, a wild, uncoordinated punch that missed. Kenneth grabbed her arm and Dorothy moved behind her, both of them restraining her with practiced efficiency. This wasn't the first time they'd dealt with a parent interfering with a placement. Mom screamed and I ran at Kenneth, hitting him in the side hard enough to make him loosen his grip. Mom pulled free and stumbled toward the doors, but Dorothy tackled her, both of them going down hard on the church tile. I tried to help Mom up, but Pastor Glenn grabbed me from behind, his arm around my neck in a chokehold. Enough. Both of you are making this so much harder than it needs to be. He dragged me toward the parking lot exit while Kenneth and Dorothy hauled my mom up. She was crying now, drunk and scared and desperate. Let go of my son. Please, I'll do anything but don't take him. Her voice broke something inside me. Dorothy's voice was ice cold. You already gave him up when you signed the papers. Whether you remember it or not doesn't matter. We have legal documentation and you have nothing but the word of a drunk. They dragged us both to the parking lot. The church was completely empty now. No witnesses, no help coming. Pastor Glenn forced me toward the minivan while Kenneth and Dorothy held Mom back. Mom broke free one more time and ran at the van, throwing herself against the sliding door before they could close it with me inside. You're not taking him. I don't care what papers you have. He's my son. Kenneth pulled her off the van and shoved her hard. She fell backward onto the pavement, her head hitting the asphalt with a sound that made my stomach turn. She lay there, stunned, blinking up at the night sky. I saw red spread beneath her head and started screaming. You killed her! She's bleeding! Mom! Pastor Glenn's grip on my arm was like iron. She's fine. She fell because she's drunk. This is exactly why you need to be removed from this situation. Your mother is a danger to herself and to you. But I could see she wasn't moving right, her eyes unfocused in a way that had nothing to do with alcohol. She needs an ambulance. She hit her head. Please, call 911. Dorothy knelt next to Mom and checked her pulse. She's breathing. She's just stunned. Glenn, we need to go. Now, before someone shows up. Pastor Glenn shoved me into the van and slammed the door. The child locks engaged. Through the window, I could see Mom lying on the pavement, blood pooling under her head, while Kenneth and Dorothy got in the front seats. Pastor Glenn leaned into the van through the driver's window. Take Riverside Road to Highway 9. The property in Greenville is ready. Keep him sedated for the drive and don't stop for anything. I'll handle the mother and the cleanup here. Once you're across state lines, the situation becomes significantly more complicated for any legal intervention. Kenneth nodded and started the engine. I pounded on the windows. She needs help. You can't just leave her there. But the van was already moving, pulling out of the parking lot and onto the dark street. I looked back through the rear window and saw Pastor Glenn kneeling next to Mom's body, his phone to his ear. Whether he was calling for help or covering his tracks, I didn't know. Mom wasn't moving. The van drove through residential streets heading toward the highway. I tried the door handles, but they were locked. I tried to climb to the front seat, but Dorothy reached back with something in her hand, a cloth that smelled chemical and wrong. Hold. Him still, Kenneth. The van swerved as Kenneth reached back while driving. I fought, but Dorothy got the cloth over my face, and the smell burned my nose and throat. The inside of the van started spinning, and my muscles stopped working properly. Just breathe. This will be easier if you don't fight. Dorothy's voice sounded distant. My vision was tunneling, consciousness slipping away despite my efforts to stay alert. The last thing I saw before everything went black was highway signs passing by, taking me farther from my mom and deeper into whatever hell Pastor Glenn had created. When I woke up, the van was stopped. My head felt like it was full of cotton, and my mouth tasted like chemicals. Gray morning light filtered through the van windows. We were parked outside a large house surrounded by trees, isolated and remote. I could hear Kenneth and Dorothy talking in the front seats. How long until he can sign the finalization papers? The lawyer needs them filed by Friday. Dorothy's voice was tired but businesslike. Kenneth checked something on his phone. Glenn says the sedation should wear off in a few hours. We'll have him sign once he's coherent enough that the signature looks legitimate. If he refuses, Glenn has power of attorney from the mother's signed documents and can execute the paperwork himself. Power of attorney. Pastor Glenn had gotten Mom to sign something giving him legal authority over decisions about me, probably during one of her desperate moments when she'd gone to church asking for help. Or he'd forged that too. I kept my eyes closed and stayed still, listening. What about the mother? Did Glenn say how he handled that situation? Kenneth's voice was unconcerned. She's at county hospital with a concussion. Glenn called an ambulance after we left and told them she'd fallen in the parking lot while intoxicated. He gave a statement saying she came to the church drunk, caused a disturbance, and injured herself. She's facing possible charges for public intoxication and creating a disturbance on church property. No one is taking her accusations seriously. Mom was alive. That knowledge gave me enough clarity to start thinking about how to get out of this situation. The van doors were still locked, but we were no longer moving. If I could get outside, I could run. The house was isolated, but there had to be other properties nearby, someone who could call police. Dorothy got out and opened the sliding door. Time to wake up, Ethan. We're at your new home. I pretended to be more groggy than I was, letting her pull me out of the van. My legs were unsteady, and the world tilted slightly, residual effects of whatever they'd used to drug me. Kenneth grabbed my other arm, and they walked me toward the house, supporting my weight as if helping an impaired person inside. The house was large and modern, all windows and clean lines. Inside was expensively decorated with that sterile perfection that meant no children actually lived here. They put me on a leather couch, and Dorothy brought water. Drink this. You need to hydrate after the sedation. I took the glass but didn't drink, my mind working through options. Kenneth sat in a chair across from me, his expression all business now that we'd dropped the pretense of this being anything other than kidnapping. Here's how this works. You're going to sign the adoption finalization papers. Your mother already signed her portion, and Pastor Glenn has power of attorney to act on her behalf for any remaining documents. Once you sign, the adoption is legally filed and processed. We become your legal guardians, and you stay here. You'll be homeschooled, you'll follow our rules, and in 2 years when you turn 18, you'll be free to leave if you want. But until then, you belong to us. We paid for you, and we expect compliance. His cold, transactional description of my future made me want to vomit. What if I refuse to sign? Dorothy smiled, and it was predatory. Then we keep you here until you do sign. We're in rural South Carolina, 40 acres of private property with no nearby neighbors. The house has a security system. Your phone is destroyed. Your mother is in the hospital facing charges and has no credibility, even if she tries to report you missing. Pastor Glenn will testify that your mother voluntarily placed you with us and that you were excited about the new opportunity. Who do you think authorities will believe? She pulled out a folder with papers inside. Or you can make this easy. Sign the papers, accept your new situation, and we can all move forward. We're not cruel people, Ethan. We wanted a child, and the system makes traditional adoption nearly impossible. Pastor Glenn provided a service that benefits everyone. Your mother gets money to fix her life. You get stability and resources. We get the family we wanted. Everyone wins if you just cooperate. But the way she said it made clear this wasn't a negotiation. They'd keep me prisoner in this house until I signed or until they found some other way to legitimize the paperwork. I thought about Mom lying in a hospital bed, probably sedated herself, maybe not even conscious enough to report me missing. I thought about Pastor Glenn's 5 years of running this operation, 20 to 30 kids stolen from struggling families and sold to wealthy couples. How many of those kids were out there right now in houses like this one, trapped in fake adoptions with no way to reach their real families? I needed to get out and expose everything before they could finish the paperwork that would make this legal. Kenneth stood up and walked to a window overlooking the back of the property. I'll give you an hour to think about your decision. In the meantime, Dorothy will show you to your room. It's secured from the outside, but you'll have everything you need. Food, clothes, a bathroom. Once you sign the papers, you'll have full access to the house and property. But until then, you stay locked up. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Glenn, we're at the property. The kid is awake and refusing to cooperate. How much legal leverage do we have to force the signature? He listened for a moment, his expression darkening. The mother did what? When? Kenneth hung up and looked at Dorothy with barely controlled anger. The mother filed a police report from her hospital bed an hour ago. She's claiming her son was kidnapped from the church last night. Glenn says he's handling it, but we need to finalize this paperwork immediately in case the police start actually investigating. Dorothy's face went pale. If they investigate, they'll find the money trail. The $45,000 transfer is documented. Kenneth grabbed the adoption papers and shoved them at me. Sign these right now. We don't have time for your teenage rebellion. Sign them or I'll break your hand and forge your signature myself. I grabbed the papers and the pen Dorothy held out. They watched me carefully. Kenneth's hands clenched into fists. I looked at the signature line and made a decision. I signed the papers. But I didn't sign my real name. I signed "Help Kidnapped" in clear letters across the signature line. Kenneth snatched the papers back and his face turned red when he saw what I'd written. You little... He backhanded me hard enough to snap my head sideways. Blood filled my mouth from a split lip. Dorothy grabbed his arm. Kenneth, stop. Violence leaves evidence. We'll get Glenn to forge the signature. We've done it before. She pulled out her phone and took a photo of me sitting on their couch, then took photos of the room, the house exterior, anything that would show my location. I'm sending these to Glenn. If the police investigate, at least he'll know where to find... She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes fixed on something behind me. I turned and saw flashing lights through the front windows. Multiple police cars pulling up the long driveway to the house. Kenneth cursed and ran toward the back door, Dorothy grabbed my arm. You're going to tell them this was all a misunderstanding. You're going to say you came here willingly. If you don't, your mother will face charges for filing a false police report and will sue her for defamation. She'll lose everything. The doorbell rang and someone pounded on the door. Police! Open up! Kenneth had disappeared through the back door. Dorothy was still gripping my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. I jerked away from her and ran to the front door, unlocking it and pulling it open. 3 police officers stood there, including the female officer from last night at the church. She looked at me and then at Dorothy, her hand moving to her weapon. Ethan Carlisle? We're here to locate you following a kidnapping report. Are you here against your will? I nodded, blood still dripping from my split lip. Yes. They drugged me and brought me here. They're trying to force me to sign fake adoption papers. My mom never agreed to any of this. It's all fraud. The officer stepped inside and looked at Dorothy. Ma'am, I need you to put your hands where I can see them. Dorothy raised her hands slowly, her expression shifting to cooperative and confused. Officer, this is a misunderstanding. The boy came here with us voluntarily. His mother arranged the placement through our church. We have all the legal documentation. The female officer gestured to her partner, who moved deeper into the house, searching for Kenneth. She focused on me. Do you have any proof of what you're claiming? Anything that would substantiate the kidnapping allegation? I pulled out my phone from my pocket, realizing Dorothy had given it back to me earlier, trying to maintain the fiction that I was free to leave. Check my call history. I called 911 last night from the church. I tried to call my mom multiple times. Pastor Glenn took my phone and lied to you about finding it in the hallway. Also, check my signature on those adoption papers. I pointed to the documents still lying on the coffee table where Kenneth had dropped them. I wrote, "Help kidnapped," across the signature line. That's not a legal signature. That's me trying to create evidence that this wasn't voluntary. The officer examined the papers, and her expression hardened. She radioed something to dispatch, and within minutes more officers arrived, including detectives who began processing the house as a crime scene. They found Kenneth hiding in the woods behind the property. They found financial records on Dorothy's laptop showing multiple $45,000 transfers to Pastor Glenn over the past 3 years, each labeled placement fee. They found a folder with documents for 6 other children, all with forged parental signatures and falsified home studies. Pastor Glenn's adoption trafficking ring was bigger than anyone had realized. I sat in an ambulance while a paramedic treated my split lip and checked me for other injuries. The female officer, whose name I learned was Sergeant Lisa Thorne, sat next to me taking my statement. Your mother is at County Hospital asking every nurse and doctor to help find you. She filed the missing persons report at 6 by this morning as soon as she was coherent enough to talk. The hospital staff initially didn't believe her because she tested positive for alcohol and had a head injury, but she was persistent enough that they called us. We pulled last night's 911 call and found your report about the church incident. When we went back to review security footage with a warrant this time, we found evidence that Pastor Glenn had edited the timestamps and deleted sections showing Kenneth and Dorothy physically restraining you. He made mistakes in the editing that a digital forensics expert caught. That's what brought us here. She showed me her phone with a photo of Mom in a hospital bed, awake and alert despite bandages on her head. She wants to see you. We can take you to the hospital now if you're medically cleared. The paramedic nodded that I was fine to go. At the hospital, Mom was sitting up in bed arguing with a nurse about leaving to find me. When she saw me walk in with Sergeant Thorne, she started crying. Ethan, oh my God, I thought they'd taken you somewhere I'd never find you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you from this. I sat on the edge of her hospital bed, and she grabbed my hands, examining my face where Kenneth had hit me. He hurt you. I'll kill him. Her voice was fierce, despite tears streaming down her face. Sergeant Thorne stood in the doorway, giving us privacy, but staying close enough to hear. Mrs. Carlisle, your son is safe now. Kenneth and Dorothy Whitfield are in custody along with Pastor Glenn Hartley. We're building a case for kidnapping, human trafficking, forgery, and conspiracy. The FBI is getting involved because this operation crossed state lines and involved multiple victims. Your testimony and Ethan's will be critical to prosecution. Mom wiped her eyes and her voice was steadier. Whatever you need. I'll testify about everything. Glenn came to me 6 weeks ago when I was at my worst, drinking every night, and about to be evicted. He said he knew a Christian family who could provide temporary housing for Ethan while I got sober. He had papers for me to sign agreeing to let Ethan stay with this family for 6 months while I did rehab. I signed them because I thought I was giving my son a better situation than what I could provide. I never saw the word adoption anywhere. He must have swapped the papers or forged my signature on the actual adoption documents. She looked at me with guilt and shame. I was trying to do the right thing, and I nearly lost you forever. I squeezed her hand. You didn't lose me. You fought for me, even when you were hurt, and everyone thought you were just a drunk making things up. You saved me. Sergeant Thorne pulled out a recorder. Mrs. Carlisle, I need to take your formal statement about Pastor Glenn's initial contact and what you believed you were signing. The more detail you can provide, the stronger our case. Over the next 3 hours, Mom and I gave complete statements documenting everything from Pastor Glenn's first approach to the struggle in the church parking lot to waking up in the Whitfield's house in South Carolina. Detectives brought in photos of the other children whose documents had been found in the house, asking if we recognized any of them or knew their families. I recognized 2 kids from youth group who'd suddenly stopped coming months ago. Their families had told people they'd moved away for better opportunities. In reality, they'd been sold to wealthy couples through Pastor Glenn's network. The investigation expanded rapidly as FBI agents identified adopting families in 4 states who'd paid Pastor Glenn for children. Some of those families genuinely believed they were participating in legitimate private adoptions, showed remorse when they learned the truth, and cooperated with returning the children to their biological families. Others fought to keep the children they'd purchased, claiming they'd bonded and separation would be traumatic. Courts had to sort through which adoptions could be reversed and which children's best interests meant staying with the adoptive families under proper legal supervision. Pastor Glenn was arrested at the church while teaching a Wednesday evening Bible study, led out in handcuffs in front of his congregation. Kenneth and Dorothy Whitfield faced multiple felony charges, and their bail was set at $500,000 each. The prosecution argued they were flight risks given their wealth and the severity of charges. Both remained in custody, awaiting trial. The church congregation split into those who believed Pastor Glenn had been operating a charitable adoption service, helping struggling families, and those who recognized the operation for what it was. Several families came forward saying they'd signed papers they didn't fully understand during desperate times, believing they were agreeing to temporary foster care or guardianship, only to discover later their parental rights had been terminated. The local news covered the scandal extensively. "Respected pastor arrested in adoption trafficking scheme" was the headline that ran for days. Reporters interviewed former church members, legal experts, child welfare advocates. The story exposed systemic failures in oversight of private adoptions and religious organizations operating with minimal regulation. Mom was released from the hospital after 2 days of observation for her concussion. We went home to our apartment and she immediately checked herself into an outpatient addiction treatment program. "I almost lost you because I couldn't stay sober. That's never happening again." She attended AA meetings every day, got a counselor, and cut back her work hours to focus on recovery. The landlord threatening eviction before suddenly disappeared after someone from the Victim Services Fund paid our back rent. I returned to school the following week, and everyone knew what had happened. Some kids avoided me, uncomfortable with the trauma. Others treated me with careful sympathy. A few asked invasive questions. My history teacher, Mr. Brennan, pulled me aside after class. "Ethan, I want you to know none of what happened was your fault. Adult authority figures failed you. The system failed you. But you survived and exposed something that needed to be stopped. That takes courage." His words helped more than he probably knew. The criminal trial started 6 months later. I testified for 3 hours about the Wednesday night at church, the adoption papers, the chase through the building, the drug sedation, waking up in South Carolina. Mom testified about Pastor Glenn's manipulation of her desperation, the papers she'd signed believing they were temporary custody agreements. Other families testified about similar experiences. The Whitfield's lawyer tried to argue they'd believed everything was legal and that they'd been deceived by Pastor Glenn. But prosecutors presented evidence of Dorothy's laptop searches for private adoption without home study and buying children legally, dating back years before they'd contacted Pastor Glenn. Kenneth's emails showed him negotiating the $45,000 payment and referring to the transaction as purchasing rather than adopting. The jury deliberated for 8 hours and returned guilty verdicts on all counts against Pastor Glenn, Kenneth, and Dorothy. Pastor Glenn showed no emotion as the verdict was read, staring straight ahead while families of victims cried in the gallery. Sentencing happened 3 weeks later. Pastor Glenn received 25 years in federal prison for child trafficking, conspiracy, and multiple counts of forgery and fraud. Kenneth Whitfield got 18 years. Dorothy Whitfield got 15 years. The judge's statement was scathing. "You exploited vulnerable families in crisis, treated children as commodities, and perverted the adoption process designed to protect children into a system for personal profit. Your actions damaged dozens of families and traumatized numerous children. These sentences reflect the severity of your crimes." Mom and I attended the sentencing, and I felt something release in my chest hearing those words. Justice wouldn't erase what happened, wouldn't give back the months those other kids spent with families who'd bought them, wouldn't restore trust in church communities that had been violated. But it was accountability. It was proof that even respected authority figures faced consequences when they abused power. The civil lawsuits against the church organization settled for an undisclosed amount that provided restitution to victim families and funded counseling services. Mom used her portion to pay off debts and create a college fund for me. We moved to a better apartment in a different school district where no one knew our story. I finished high school and applied to college for social work with plans to specialize in family services. My application essay was about my experience, about understanding firsthand how systems fail vulnerable people and being determined to work within those systems to prevent future failures. I got accepted to 3 universities and chose one with a strong advocacy program. 4 years later, I graduated with my social work degree and took a position with Child Protective Services, investigating adoption fraud and family exploitation. Every case I work reminds me of that Wednesday night in the church office. The feeling of being powerless while adults decided my future without my consent. I use that memory to fuel my advocacy for children whose voices aren't being heard, whose circumstances make them vulnerable to predators operating in systems designed to help rather than harm. Pastor Glenn is still in prison, eligible for parole in 2041. Kenneth and Dorothy Whitfield are serving their sentences at separate facilities. The church building where it all happened was sold, and a community center operates there now. Mom has been sober for 8 years and works as a peer counselor, helping other parents in recovery. We're closer now than we ever were before, bound by the trauma we survived together and the fight we won against people who tried to destroy our family for profit. When people ask me how I process what happened, I tell them I turned anger into purpose, victimhood into advocacy, and the worst night of my life into motivation, to ensure no other kid signs adoption papers under duress in a church office while their real parent lies bleeding in a parking lot outside. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.